noon today. Now, next on the programme, we're talking about when you were pregnant, whether you felt really supported at work. Did your boss support you? Did you feel like you were valued as much as you were before? And did you get the same respect as your colleagues? So I'd like to hear your experience on this, please. Being pregnant at work, what's it been, good or bad for you? Tell me what happened. 03459 570057. Give me a call right now. A group of MPs say women expecting a baby often face shocking treatment at work, including being forced out of their jobs. Members of the Women and Equalities Committee are calling for women to get better protection, including changes to health and safety practices, because of a rise in workplace discrimination over the past decade. The MP for Lewis, Maria Caulfield, is a member of that committee and joins me in the studio, along with Martin Williams, who's head of employment law for the Sussex firm Mayo Win-Back. So good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we should be able to sort this out in the next few minutes. Maria, what's the issue as you see it and the committee sees it at the moment?
Well, we started an inquiry because we wanted to see what progress had been made in the last 10 years, and we were actually shocked to hear evidence both from women, from in the public sector and the private sector, for small businesses, large businesses, who are actually telling us that the situation has actually got worse over the last 10 years. So if you are pregnant, if you're a young mum, you are likely to have faced some sort of discrimination, and it's contributing to the gender pay gap as well. Up until 40, there isn't really a gender gap between men and women. After 40, the gap is growing, and childcare and having children is a huge factor in that.
Well, let's pick up with the discrimination in the workplace. So what sort of stories are you hearing about when people tell their, eventually get around to telling the boss that they're expecting? What sort of thing happens then? What changes?
Well, it's very subtle, so there's nothing, that women will necessarily think is discrimination. But what tends to happen is we know that women who are pregnant or on maternity leave are more likely to be made redundant, say, than a man who's, less able to do their job or has had performance issues. And this is very subtle. And there's also, often women leave the workplace when they've had a baby, maybe take a couple of years out, and then when they try to come back, find that they're getting less jobs. About 50% of women who have had a child are working below their skill set, and that's because they can't get jobs that match their skill set. So it's very, very subtle. So you're unlikely to go into your boss's office and he sacks you on the spot for being pregnant, but there is subtle ways that discrimination happens.
Martin, what does the law say?
That you shouldn't do it.
So why is it still done?
Because if people think that they can get away with things, they will try and do it. It's basic nature. Some employers can look at a situation, they might have a redundancy program coming up, and that could be a very legitimate redundancy program. They've got to make some cost savings somewhere. And one of the things that they may look at is that, as Maria's just said, looking at subtle ways that they can remove people through a redundancy program and go, well, we'd rather pick on that person. They're going to cost us. They're not going to be around. They're going to take the maternity leave. We're still going to have to pay them, albeit that statutory maternity pay is not a king's ransom. We're still going to have to pay them. Still have to consider what happens when they come back, making adjustments for that. And I'm afraid that there is a feeling out there for some employers that that person might still go off and have yet another baby, and we'll have that problem down the road. We come across that in our practice, and it is something that still goes on, as Maria's pointed out.
But has the law not tightened around that kind of practice in the last 10 years?
It can. I mean, looking at, I've not seen the full details of the report that Maria has produced, but I think what she and the other committee members are trying to do is make the evidential base a little bit stronger. It can be really difficult to try and show that a particular decision was because of pregnancy, especially when, as she said, there are subtle moves that are made. And when we're running cases, we have to look at the evidential base. So we will speak to somebody who's had this sort of problem, and we will say, well, what evidence have you got that it was because of the pregnancy? And that can be difficult for them to do. So the proposals that are being put forward, as I understand them, are meant to be more stringent so that it makes it easier for the woman coming forward to protect her position, either because there is there is a blanket protection except in extreme circumstances for their role, or it makes it easier for them to bring the claim because there are proposals being put forward to reduce or maybe even get rid of the costs involved in presenting a claim, which there are costs now.
Yeah, talk us through that, Maria. What the committee has found out. So somebody is pregnant and they suddenly find themselves in a redundancy program, for instance, either while they're still expecting or once they become a new mum. That's probably not a great time to try and take legal action against your employer, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem, that women are very nervous about taking legal action. And obviously, because they've got other issues on their mind. They might be having a new baby, they might have children already, and it's a busy time for young mums. And one of the things the report suggests is that we remove the 3-month time limit, because 3 months is not a long time to raise a claim against your employer if you are having problems. But also there's the issue of tribunal fees. We heard from women that does put them off taking a case against their employer, because if they lose, they're worried about their fees. But it's also about raising the profile of the issue. Many women may have been affected by this and not realised. So it's saying to women, if you are facing this situation, have a look and see if there is a genuine reason why there's a redundancy programme being rolled out at work, or whether actually you are facing discrimination.
Is there a balance to be found, do you think, between it being very difficult from an employer's point of view and it being very difficult from an employee's point of view?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We in the report and in the inquiry, we also heard from employers, and there are tax breaks available for employers to help them towards the cost of maternity pay, but there's not necessarily tax breaks to help them replace that post and introduce maternity cover. So I think, we do need to look at what the government can do to support employers so they're not worried about taking on women who are, going to take maternity leave. But it's about changing the culture. The public sector were as bad as the private sector in this, and that's something that we should be able to influence through government.
Yeah. So what's going to happen next after your committee's findings?
Well, the report will go to ministers, and they have usually a couple of months or a few months to read it through and to take up some of our recommendations. But we will be holding their feet to the fire, because we can't. It's embarrassing that we've gone backwards in 10 years instead of actually strengthening women's rights.
Do you think that will surprise people listening to this right now?
I think it will, and part of this report is to raise awareness of the issue, is that, things have got worse, and in other countries, such as Germany, women have much better protection, and it's about ensuring that we improve the situation, but also look at our culture. Are we really supporting young mums and young dads in the workplace?
And Martin, if somebody does feel aggrieved and think they've been essentially got rid of illegally, to try to take action against the employer then, I mean, that sounds, from what Maria was saying, like a costly enterprise.
It can be. Since tribunal fees were introduced under the coalition government, there has been a fall in the number of claims made. The idea behind tribunal fees was to try and get rid of unmeritorious claims. Unfortunately, it doesn't really necessarily hit meritorious claims. It hits those who cannot afford to make a claim, or feel they cannot afford to make a claim because they're putting something at risk, i.e. their own money.
Also, claims without merit are only claims without merit once it's found out that they're not.
Yeah,
and there hasn't been an infringement.
And there's been, this is obviously an ancillary argument to this particular issue, but it has been seen in the legal profession as a sledgehammer to crack a nut to some extent, because actually you can still make an unmeritorious claim as long as you've got the finances and the security to feel as though you can pay for the fees. So whether it tackles the situation head on, but it has resulted, the one thing that cannot be disputed is that it has resulted in less claims being made. And that can be a difficulty for somebody who's facing starting a family and everything like that.
Yeah, it's not like money's overflowing out the pot when you're trying to put together a new family, is it? And what sort of money are we talking about to initially start something like this?
The tribunal process involves initially going to ACAS, and there's a process called early conciliation, and that is compulsory because you need to get a certificate number in order to make your claim, and ACAS produce that certificate number at the end of the early conciliation process. That bit costs you nothing. But when you make the claim in the tribunal, you have to come up with £250. There is a fee remission system, but it can be complicating and be daunting for somebody who's on their own. And that's £250 just to lodge the claim. Then if the claim gets to a hearing, you have to pay a further £950 in order to get it into a hearing. So £1,200
I'm thinking
overall.
cot, buggy, some clothes. All this money could be spent elsewhere.
Yeah, obviously people have to think about where they put their resources.
And if you lose, do you end up paying your employer's costs as well?
No, I mean, in the tribunal system still, it is a matter that you bear your own costs, but that is another consideration that anybody, especially somebody who's, without a job, and also starting to raise a family, has to give consideration to, because you have to cover your own legal costs. So if you get representation from someone such as myself, then you will have to bear those legal costs yourself. It's possible to do it yourself, but of course, again, it is also possible that the employer will engage a lawyer such as myself to defend the claimant, so they might feel as though it's a bit of an unequal playing field.
So an employer might just look at the cold, hard costs of all this and decide that actually, despite all of that, it's still more cost-effective for them to get rid of you while you're pregnant or on maternity leave and, bear the cost of a case like that.
Well, individual employers will have different reasons for any particular actions that they take, but they might feel that the likelihood of somebody challenging any particular decision that is seemingly discriminatory, they might think that the odds on that are rather low, and that's why they might see it through. But I think you also have to, Maria's made the point about employers, I think you have to consider the employer's position on here. We're talking about what is a social situation in terms of attitudes and things like that. And employers, will need to see that they're not being, tainted with, an overall social ill on this and being asked to try and rectify it, because they'll say, well, just a minute, this may cost us, this may affect the way that we do our business, etc., etc. So they are going to want to know that it's part of a wider program to address a social need, because employers can't address those sorts of social problems by themselves.
Maria, what else have you come up with in this committee? I'm intrigued about the changes to health and safety practices. Where does that come into this mix?
Well, I mean, we heard from some women in the public sector, in the, say, the fire brigade service, for example, who, when they told their boss that they were pregnant, were moved to back office tasks. And was there a need to do that? And a lot of women are finding that is that when they, either say to their employer that they're pregnant and they're, waiting to go on to maternity leave, their role has changed and it's been downgraded, or when they return, their role is downgraded as well. And this is where we start to see the gender pay gap starting to emerge for women in their 40s. It's because although they've got the same skill set, if not more skills than their male colleagues, because they've been pregnant, because they go on maternity leave, they're often disadvantaged by that. And that's another element to the inquiry.
Is it easy to have that? I mean, taking the firefighter example, is it easy to have that conversation without infringing people's rights? Because actually there may be a time in someone's pregnancy where frontline firefighting duty may not be appropriate, but how do you have that conversation without one party kind of showing their hand of cards too early, as it were?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it is about having that conversation, and what we heard from lots of women was that those conversations are not had, that they're automatically just, their roles changed, their roles downgraded, and yet they felt able to do that job. Being pregnant isn't a disability. You should be able to carry on and do your job, but many women felt they weren't having those conversations with their employers.
Can we untie the employer's hands from the red tape and allow them to have that conversation freely and openly? As an employee, Maria, what would be best for you during this period of time before you leave us on maternity? Yeah. I mean, how can you have that without blowing the whole thing?
Yeah, and I think, that's the sort of dialogue we're trying to get going. In today's society, working from home, flexible working should be so much easier than it was 10 years ago. If women feel that they could, work from home,